Take off your shoe. If you cannot do that right now, think about the last time you looked at your bare foot. Look at your first 3 toes, the big toe, the one next to it, and the one next to that. Are they roughly the same length? Do they form a straight line across the front of your foot instead of tapering down from the big toe? If they do, you have what is called the Roman foot, and you are carrying it in roughly 1 in 4 people on this planet. The name comes from Rome. The association comes from Roman military statuary, from the wide, squared forefoot carved into the boots and sandals of the legionaries who marched across 3 continents. But here is the thing nobody tells you when they hand you the name. The Roman foot did not start in Rome. Rome did not invent it. Rome did not even fully understand it. Rome just happened to be the civilization large enough, powerful enough, and well documented enough to get the credit. What modern DNA has revealed about this foot shape has almost nothing to do with Italy. It goes back further than the empire, further than the republic, further than the city itself. And what it tells you about where your body actually comes from is older than any border Rome ever drew. The Roman foot is defined by one thing. The first 3 toes, the big toe, the second toe, and the third toe, are approximately the same length. Not close, not almost. The same. The 4th and 5th toes are shorter, stepping down from there, but that front wall of 3 toes creates a profile that is distinctly squared off rather than tapered. When you look at it straight on, the front of the foot does not form a diagonal slope. It forms a platform. That platform is built by the metatarsal bones inside the foot. These are the long bones that connect your ankle structure to your toes. In an Egyptian foot, the most common shape globally, found in roughly 50 to 70% of the population, the first metatarsal behind the big toe is the longest, and each one behind it gets progressively shorter, which is why the toes taper down in a clean diagonal line. In the Greek foot, the second metatarsal is longer than the first, which is why the second toe extends past the big toe. In the Roman foot, the first 3 metatarsals are close enough in length that the toes they support sit at nearly the same height. The bone architecture behind the visible shape is what determines everything. Estimates on how common the Roman foot is vary depending on the source and how strictly the definition is applied. Most place it somewhere between 20 and 25% of the global population. Some clinical sources put it lower, some put it higher. But across every study and every population examined, it is consistent enough to be the 2nd or 3rd most common foot shape on Earth, present on every continent, in every ethnic group, in every geographic region that has ever been measured. Rome got the name because Rome left the evidence. When archaeologists and art historians began cataloging ancient sculpture in the 18th and 19th centuries, they noticed something. Roman statuary, the military figures, the emperors, the gods carved in marble and cast in bronze across the empire depicted a foot with a squared forefoot profile. The first 3 toes sitting at roughly the same level, the wide, stable platform that became the visual signature of Roman physical power. Scholars gave it the name Roman foot, and the name stuck. But there is a complication buried in the art historical record that most people never hear. Roman sculptors copied Greek originals constantly. The Romans had enormous admiration for Greek art, and a significant portion of what survives as Roman sculpture is a Roman reproduction of a Greek source. The Greeks idealized the long second toe and carved it into almost everything. When Roman sculptors copied Greek originals, they reproduced the Greek foot along with everything else. This means that many Roman statues do not actually show the Roman foot at all. They show the Greek foot wearing Roman clothes. The distinctly Roman foot appears most clearly not in the copied artwork but in the original Roman military imagery. In the engineering of the caligae, the hobnailed military sandal that was standard issue for every Roman foot soldier for centuries. The caligae was built with a broad flat sole that accommodated a wide squared forefoot because that was the foot the army actually needed to house. The boot was not designed around an ideal. It was designed around a reality. A Roman legionary marched up to 20 miles a day, in full armor, carrying a pack that historians estimate at anywhere from 60 to 90 pounds depending on the campaign. Across roads, mountains, riverbeds, and desert ground. They did this not occasionally, but as routine, campaign after campaign, year after year. The Roman army did not conquer territory with swords alone. It conquered territory with feet, and the piece of equipment that made it possible was the caligae. The caligae was not a sandal in any casual sense. It was a precisely engineered military boot constructed from thick cattle leather, reinforced with iron hobnails hammered through the sole, and designed with an open lattice upper that allowed constant airflow to prevent blisters during sustained marching. The toe box was broad. The entire design accommodated a forefoot that was not tapered but squared, a wide platform that distributed pressure evenly across the front of the foot with every step. The legionaries were so defined by this boot that they were simply called caligae, the booted ones. At its peak under Emperor Trajan in 117 AD, the Roman Empire governed somewhere between 60 and 75 million people, roughly a fifth of the entire world population at the time. That empire was physically occupied. Roman soldiers, settlers, and traders moved into every province and stayed. They intermarried with local populations across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. They had children. Those children had children. And the genetic material those legionaries carried, including the bone architecture behind the Roman foot, dispersed across 3 continents over centuries. Rome did not just name this foot shape. Rome carried it across the known world. Here is where the story stops being about history and starts being about you specifically. The Roman foot is not a cultural inheritance. It is not something you developed over time or picked up from your environment. The squared forefoot profile you were born with was written into your genome before you took your first breath. And the genetic architecture behind it is more complex than most people expect. Foot shape is what geneticists call a polygenic trait, not controlled by a single gene that switches one way or the other. It is the product of multiple genes interacting simultaneously, each contributing a small part of the final result. The relative lengths of your metatarsal bones, the bones that determine whether your first 3 toes sit at the same height or taper down from the big toe, are governed by this kind of multi-gene system. Twin studies confirm it. Research on toe length genetics found that among identical twins, the trait matched with near perfect consistency. Among fraternal twins, it diverged far more often. The signal is unmistakably genetic. Ancestry DNA put a number on it. When their team surveyed over 790,000 people about their toe length and compared the responses against DNA data, they identified more than 930 genetic markers associated with the relative length of the first and second toe alone, 930 markers. For context, eye color is influenced by roughly 16 genes. Height involves somewhere between 700 and 1,000 variants. The genetic complexity governing your forefoot is comparable to the complexity governing how tall you are. That architecture was passed to you through a chain of ancestors stretching back further than any civilization that ever carved a foot into stone. So what happens when you actually spit in a tube and send it to a lab? What do Ancestry and 23andMe tell you about your foot? The honest answer is less than you might expect and more than most people realize. Neither will hand you a result that says Roman foot. What they give you is a polygenic score, a statistical calculation that looks across hundreds of genetic markers and estimates the likelihood that a particular trait is expressed in your body. For toe length, Ancestry DNA uses those 930 markers to generate a probability, not a certainty, a weighted prediction based on patterns observed across nearly 1 million people. It is meaningful the same way a weather forecast is meaningful. It tells you something real about what is likely without telling you everything. What the DNA data makes undeniably clear is this: the Roman foot is not a Mediterranean marker. It is not a signal of Italian ancestry or Southern European heritage. The genetic variants associated with the squared forefoot profile appear across every ethnic group and every geographic population that has ever been tested. European populations carry them. West African populations carry them. East Asian populations carry them. The frequency varies slightly between groups, the same way any polygenic trait varies. But there is no population on Earth where this foot shape does not appear. The name is Roman. The foot is human. Before I show you the last part, if you want to look at your own results and see where your foot shape fits into your bloodline, I put a full 3-volume PDF bundle over at the OriginDNA website. It shows you how to read your raw data and find matches beyond what Ancestry or 23andMe tell you. Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. Rome was founded, by traditional account, in 753 BC. The Roman foot existed long before that. Long before the first stone was laid on the Palatine Hill. Long before anyone spoke Latin. Long before the Mediterranean had a civilization powerful enough to leave a name on anything. The foot shape Rome eventually claimed was already circulating through human populations for thousands of years before Rome was a village. To understand why, you have to go back much further. Roughly 4 to 6 million years ago, the ancestors of modern humans began the transition to upright bipedal walking. That transition required a complete restructuring of the foot. The primate foot functions like a hand. The big toe is opposable. The entire structure is mobile, designed for climbing. The human foot is the opposite, rigid, arched. The toes locked in line, and designed not for gripping, but for propulsion. Every element of the modern human foot is an engineering solution to the problem of walking upright across varied terrain for long distances. The metatarsal bones were central to that restructuring. As the foot evolved from a grasping tool into a walking platform, the relative lengths of those bones shifted to support the demands of bipedal movement. Research published through Harvard University confirmed that the transition to bipedalism drove substantial changes to foot bone architecture, with toe lengths adjusting to support walking and running efficiency. The variation in how those bones settled, some people with a tapered first metatarsal, some with 3 of near equal length, is not a malfunction. It is the residue of millions of years of evolutionary adjustment, still playing out across the human gene pool. Rome did not create this foot. Evolution did. Rome just arrived late and put its name on it. If the Roman foot were genuinely Roman, if it originated in Italy and spread outward from there, you would expect to find it concentrated in populations with Mediterranean ancestry and rare everywhere else. That is not what the evidence shows. What it shows is a foot shape appearing in ancient art and skeletal records from cultures that never had contact with Rome, predating the empire by thousands of years, on continents Rome never reached. The classification system we use today was developed by Western scholars cataloging Western art. The names reflect the civilizations those scholars were studying, not the actual geographic origin of the traits. Egyptian art depicted the tapered foot. Greek art idealized the long second toe. Roman military imagery showed the squared forefoot. So those names were applied, but the naming was never a genetic analysis. It was an art historical observation made by people looking at a narrow slice of human visual culture and drawing conclusions wider than the evidence supported. The squared forefoot profile appears in artistic and skeletal records from sub-Saharan Africa, from pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, from East and Southeast Asia, from populations that were geographically and culturally isolated from Rome for their entire histories. The Ainu people of northern Japan, one of the most genetically distinct indigenous populations on Earth, show toe-length distributions entirely inconsistent with the idea that foot shape tracks Mediterranean ancestry. The foot shape is real, the classification is useful, but the name is a label that a particular era of scholarship placed on a biological variation that belongs to no single civilization. It was here before Egypt named its foot, before Greece idealized its foot, before Rome marched on its foot. It was here because the human species carried it here, long before any of those names meant anything at all. The human species began in Africa. That is not a theory. It is the most thoroughly documented conclusion in population genetics, confirmed across decades of research, thousands of ancient DNA samples, and millions of modern genetic profiles. Modern humans emerged on the African continent somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago. And for roughly the first 100,000 years of our existence as a species, we stayed there, then we left. The migration out of Africa began in earnest around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. Small groups crossed into the Arabian Peninsula, moved into South Asia, pushed into East Asia, crossed land bridges into the Americas, and eventually populated every habitable landmass on Earth. They carried their genes with them. Every trait encoded in the human genome, including the polygenic architecture governing the relative length of your metatarsal bones, traveled with those migrating populations and diversified as those populations. Separated, adapted, and occasionally merged across thousands of generations. This is why the Roman foot appears everywhere. It was not carried out of Italy by legionaries. It was carried out of Africa by the ancestors of every human being alive today. The frequencies vary between populations, slightly higher in some European groups, differently distributed across African and East Asian populations, but those differences are the fingerprints of migration, not of Roman conquest. They tell the story of which populations mixed with which, when, and along which routes. A genetic map of human movement drawn across tens of thousands of years, visible today in the shape of the front of your foot. What the Roman Empire did was accelerate mixing that was already happening. Rome redistributed the trait. Rome did not originate it. Roughly 1 in 4 people walking the earth right now has a Roman foot. At current global population levels, that translates to somewhere around 2 billion people carrying a squared forefoot profile, 3 metatarsals of near equal length. A wide front platform where most feet taper to a point. 2 billion people, and almost none of the systems built around human feet were designed with them in mind. The modern shoe industry is built around the Egyptian foot, the tapered toe box, the design that narrows from the ball of the foot toward the front, following the diagonal slope of toes descending from big toe to pinky. That shape fits roughly 50 to 70% of the population reasonably well. For everyone else, it is a daily negotiation between the foot they have and the shoe the industry decided to make. For people with the Roman foot specifically, standard widths compress the front of the foot. The first 3 toes are pushed together. Pressure distributes unevenly. Over years and decades, that compression carries real biomechanical consequences. The Roman foot changes how weight moves through the front of the foot during walking. Where the Egyptian foot loads cleanly through the big toe during push-off, the Roman foot distributes that load more evenly across the first 3 metatarsal heads simultaneously. This is not a disadvantage. It is a different mechanical strategy. On uneven ground, rocky surfaces, lateral movements, that broader distribution can provide stability advantages a more tapered foot does not offer. The Roman legionaries who marched this foot across mountains and riverbeds and cobbled roads may have carried a subtle biomechanical edge in the very terrain that defined their campaigns. The foot was not just named after the soldiers. It may have helped build what they built. Here is what the Roman foot is not. It is not proof of Italian ancestry. It is not a signal that your family line passed through the Mediterranean. It is not a genetic passport stamped in Rome. The name was applied by scholars looking at statuary, not by geneticists looking at DNA. And the difference between those 2 methods of observation is the difference between a guess and a measurement. What the Roman foot actually is a skeletal arrangement. 3 metatarsal bones that settled at near equal lengths during fetal development, governed by a polygenic system of inherited variants, passed down through your family line across hundreds of generations. The genetic code that set those bone lengths was inherited from your parents, who inherited it from theirs, through a chain extending back to the populations that carried this trait out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago. That is the actual origin story, not Rome, not the Mediterranean, the African continent, and the long migration that followed. The naming system, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Celtic, Germanic, is a historical artifact. A useful shorthand for describing visible variation in human foot morphology, built on the observation that certain shapes appeared in the art of certain ancient civilizations. Those civilizations noticed the shapes. They depicted them, but they did not create them, and they do not own them. Every foot shape in that system appears in every population on Earth, every ethnicity, every continent, every geographic region ever studied. The shapes are universal because the evolutionary pressures that produce them were universal. Your Roman foot is not a relic of an ancient empire. It is a relic of something much older. Rome saw it, Rome named it, but the foot was never Rome's to name. Look at your first 3 toes one more time. If they sit at roughly the same height, if the front of your foot forms a platform instead of a slope, you carry a skeletal arrangement encoded across multiple genes, inherited through hundreds of generations, shaped by evolutionary pressures that were running millions of years before Rome was founded. The squared forefoot profile that Roman military sculptors carved into their legionaries was not something Rome invented. It was something Rome noticed, something Rome built boots around, and something Rome carried across 3 continents without ever fully understanding what it was. 20 to 25% of every human population on Earth carries this shape. It appears in every ethnic group ever studied. It has been found in skeletal records from cultures that predated Rome by thousands of years, and in populations that Rome never reached. The name is Roman, the foot is human, and the story it carries is older than any empire, any language, any written record that has ever attempted to explain it. 3 foot shapes, 3 variations on the same millions of years of evolutionary engineering. Egyptian, Greek, Roman, each one a current expression of an architecture that has been running since the first hominins stood up and started walking. The foot you walk on today is the latest version of that project. It predates your country. It predates your language. It predates every border on every map. Drop a comment below. Which foot do you have? Let us see the numbers. Subscribe for more. Share this with someone and make them look at their feet. Your foot was here before Rome was.
Thanks for watching this video, but before you go, don't let your DNA results just sit there unanswered. Tap the link on the description to download your ebook and find out what your raw data is hiding.